Welcome to this short presentation on choosing your pieces. Choosing your pieces, it's something that we all have to do on quite a regular basis. And I'd simply like to just give you a few ideas to put into your mind, which I hope might help when you actually are choosing your pieces. You know, what's the next piece I'm going to play? I'd like to talk a little bit to begin with on the whole kind of concept of progress. What does progress actually mean? Are we aware of progress? How do we see it? Do we notice it when it happens? Which is important that we do, in fact. And I want to suggest to begin with that sometimes progress goes in a sort of linear direction. You know, maybe as a beginner, you're learning from a tutor, you start on page one with stage one, and next week you go on to page two, to stage two. And obviously, all progress in a sense is on a continuum. And as you move forward to whatever that continuum is about, maybe it's about learning to control your tone quality or understand rhythm or some kind of musical aspect, it moves along in a linear direction. And sometimes progress goes in a more lateral direction. It goes sideways, and that's fine. It really doesn't matter. It's not as good if we're moving sideways. It's not as though we might get stuck on something, but we may want to look at something in a lot more detail, and so we are, as it were, going sideways more. And that's fine. So I just want to make that point to begin with, that progress can be linear, it can be lateral, it can go sideways. I also want to introduce this idea, the idea of what I call continual incremental progress. And the point here really is that we are always making progress, but sometimes that progress can be very tiny, tiny little increments. And I want us to notice that progress happening as well. Otherwise, sometimes we can become a little deflated or demotivated. But if we are aware of this continual incremental progress happening all the time, we never go to that place. And I'm going to represent this progress by this little arrow. So here's the arrow. This is, in a sense, within either a practice session or a lesson, one bit of progress. You know, maybe we decided to do one thing in practice, or our teacher gave us one thing to do in a lesson, and we did that thing. We got it right. We made some progress. It might have been a tiny little thing, little bit of incremental progress. And here's a lesson. And each of these little flashing arrows is one little activity. It may be really quite a small activity, or it may be something a bit bigger. And each time we made some progress. And I'm sure you weren't counting, but in that lesson or in that practice, that could indicate practice or lesson, we did 22 things. Maybe of our own choosing in practice, or our teacher gave us 22 things to do, and we did each of those 22 things. We did each of them well. We made 22 bits of progress. That's what I call continual incremental progress, and I want us to feel that's very much what's happening, because it's very motivational. Some of you may know this thing. I call this my musical map of the world. You can download this from my website, which I think is very useful. It's an interesting thing to have. And when I'm talking to teachers, I'm always saying to them, a lesson is a kind of voyage of discovery around this map. We go from one thing to another. We have our piece in the middle, and we do some work on the rhythm. Maybe we then do a scale that is the scale of the piece. Maybe we do a rhythm from the piece within that scale. And you can see what I mean. You kind of go around this map thinking what is going to be the next good thing to do to move forward. So with that sort of in the back of our minds, let's have a think now about how we move forward and how we're going to choose the next piece. One good way of doing this is to think, well, in terms of two streams. One is technique, one is repertoire. And obviously, we are going to be doing both of those things. We are wanting to increase our technique, grow our technique. We are wanting to learn repertoire. So probably, if we are players who really take our playing very seriously, I'm sure you all do, we're probably going to be having some technical work, some repertoire work at the same time. One of the easiest ways really to look at choosing our pieces and making progress as we choose our pieces is to look at grade exam lists. I'm not suggesting you need to do a grade exam, but you might just want to look at grade exam lists. Forgive me for most of these actually say clarinet, but of course the saxophone applies exactly the same way. And so you might just look at exam syllabuses. And given that exams now go from really quite elementary, what they now call initial, right the way through to diploma, there are grade lists, repertoire lists from initial, which is almost at beginner standard, right the way through to diploma. That gives us an enormous amount of repertoire and can give us really quite a good journey on which to go. I have to say that although I do work for ABRSM, their new syllabus is a little questionable in the sense, in the old days, and all the other exam boards still go by this, that there were 3 pieces required, list A, B and C, and list C was always an unaccompanied study, which was very good, very sensible, and gave you a good journey, a good way forward. For some reason, and nothing to do with me, ABRSM have decided not to do that anymore, and they sort of mix their studies up in lists A, B and C, and it's not quite so clear. So maybe actually, regrettably, the ABRSM syllabus is not always the most helpful one to look at. But going back to my previous slide, there are many boards to look at. Actually, there are some overseas boards. The Canadian exam board is excellent. It's very comprehensive. The clarinet and saxophone syllabuses are excellent. Also, the AMEB, the Australian examining board, also excellent. And so don't just limit yourselves to UK exam boards. Look all over the place, and you'll find interesting ideas there. Obviously, your teacher, if you're having lessons, will be able to help you decide, what good repertoire is out there and what you might go to next. I'd just like to pose an interesting question at this point. What's the difference between grade 1 and grade 8? I just say that as a reference point, really. I could have asked the question in a different way. What's the difference between a beginner and an advanced student or an advanced player? And really, the difference I would like to suggest is simply that the beginner only has a few ingredients in their bag. There's that beginner with their little bag. An advanced student has a lot of ingredients in their bag that they've understood about music. And really, the progression between grade 1 and grade 8, or from beginner to advanced, is all about making sure that we learn ingredients, the ingredients of music. I'll give you a list of what they are in a minute. We know what the ingredients are. We learn each one carefully, and we add that to our bag. And so we become more advanced. It's just that our bag of ingredients gets bigger all the time. And if we understand that it's simply adding ingredients, if we understand that those ingredients become more complex, they don't become more difficult, they just become more complex. If we understand each thing in a very progressive kind of way, they don't become more difficult, they just become more complex. And if we understand each one as we're going along, then there's no problem. And if we are learning things in the right order, for the right reasons, at the right time, then we can all move forward. It's simply knowing, what are the ingredients? How do we move forward in each particular ingredient? Let me just give you a little bit more indication what I mean. Maybe it's key. We have a sense of progression. Maybe we start with understanding C major. We practice the scale of C major and we move through keys. Keys don't get more difficult. They get more complex in the sense that there's more key work, for example, on the instrument to be using as our keys get a little bit more complex. But they're not more difficult. And if we learn it in a progressive way, one at a time, we just move forward. So other aspects of progression, rhythm, markings, other markings, notational symbols, and the control of all these things, of course, related theory, character of the music, shape and phrasing when we play, all the kind of technical stuff that is there. knowing the historical context of music that we're playing, understanding style, knowing something of our instrument and the instrument of repertoire when it was being written, knowing a bit of structure and practical analysis of pieces that we're playing. Doing a lot of intelligent listening is going to help us a lot in our progression. It will help us in our understanding of interpretation. And in a sense, if we allow a lesson and practice to unfold based around all these different ingredients, we move from one to another as appropriate, or we just choose some appropriate ones as we're practicing, then we are always going to be progressing and moving forward. So let's look more closely at the kind of considerations that we may make when we are choosing our particular repertoire. And when we choose our repertoire, and we want to be looking at the ingredients to see whether is this the right next piece to choose? Are the ingredients that this piece have well related to the last piece? So we want to look to see, is this repertoire appropriate? Is it filling its function, which is that we've done a piece that uses this range of notes. The next piece we want to add some more range. We want to go over the break. We want to start working at more pieces in the altissimo register. We want to start working at our technique. Has this next study got more staccato in it? Has this next piece got more staccato in it? In which case, that's the good piece to learn. That's the piece that's going to take us forward. I want to remember, as we are moving forward, also, is it absolutely at the right level? And I hope we get good at thinking that, and our teacher can help us think that thought and work out the answer. And this is important. How does the piece relate to the previous piece or the previous study or exercise we've been studying? And that's an important connection to make. Here's the piece I'm playing at the moment. This new piece, how is it related? And if we make these relationships carefully and thoughtfully, then we are always going to be progressing in a very positive and understandable kind of way. To some degree, it's important that we like the repertoire that we're playing, not always. And sometimes, we may set off on a study that we don't like that much, but we know it's a good study to do next. And inevitably, we probably do end up liking it. Or someone may suggest, you've just learnt this piece. This is a really good piece now to follow up. It takes some of the ingredients and extends them. And maybe we like it. Maybe we don't like it that much to begin with. But I think, we need to stick with it. And I'm sure that it will grow on us if it hasn't done to begin with anyway. We need to learn pieces, and they need to have a kind of context for us personally. Like, for example, it may be a solo piece, which may be a piece with piano, with orchestra, a technical piece. We want to learn that piece. There's a reason that we want to learn that particular solo piece. Maybe we are learning pieces, practicing parts from an orchestra that we may be a member of, or a quintet, or an ensemble, or a group, or whatever it happens to be. And again, we are thinking carefully about practicing that in an appropriate time in the right order. Maybe we want to learn something in order to allow us to collaborate with a distant friend, and I'm going to explain what I mean in a second. Or indeed, maybe we don't get the chance to play an ensemble music very much. Certainly this was a thing during the worst bits of COVID. And we can create our own ensemble. And I just want to mention this because this is such a good thing now. Do you know an app called Acapella? Acapella, sorry, I don't have any shares in Acapella. I think that's their app sign. Acapella, it's a great app. And in fact, with Acapella, you can record yourself and then you play a part back, maybe a clarinet quartet, a saxophone quartet, and you can play all the parts. And it is such fun. It's such fun. And with Acapella, that really might give you some motivation to choose particular pieces. If you're a clarinet player, I love the clarinet. I love the clarinet quartet repertoire, for example. And if you don't happen to have three friends, you can play all the parts yourself. And there's a lot of fun there. And that will actually inspire you an awful lot in choosing the kind of repertoire you might want to play. What I'd like to do next, and forgive me, I actually did record something on a cappella with a distant friend, and we did this over in COVID times, and it was just a performance of the carol, the wonderful, that lovely Finzi carol, and we did this on a cappella. And if you'll forgive me, I'd just like to play you this particular little recording. You can see what you can do with a cappella. Hopefully, it's going to come up now. Well, I hope that's given you a few ideas on choosing your pieces. You know, what shall I play next? What repertoire shall I choose next? It's wonderful that the saxophone and clarinet repertoires are enormous, and obviously you'll have your favorite kind of genres within that repertoire. But obviously, it's important to choose well. You should never be playing anything that is too difficult. You know, it's not too difficult. It just, if it does feel too difficult, it's just the wrong piece to be playing at that moment. And there will be nothing stopping you probably playing that a little bit later on. But if your route is the right route, then of course there's nothing stopping you from becoming as advanced as you want, if you're moving in the way that we've been talking about in this little talk. So have a wonderful time playing all the wonderful repertoire out there. It's one of the great joys of life, playing our instruments and collaborating with friends in whatever way you might do. So thank you very much for listening, and look forward to being with you again soon.